We've made it through the midterm elections, and we're here today to do a little bit of analysis on Palo Alto and East Palo Alto races, one of which is still pending. ELENA, what's going on with the school board race?
Well, not much has changed, actually, since Tuesday night. This morning, there have been daily or twice daily updates from the county registrar, but they're counting ballots pretty slowly. There's almost 300,000 uncounted ballots still in the county. So, in the Palo Alto school board race in particular, they seem to be not picking up those ballots. So the numbers have changed really, really slightly. There's still a 26 vote margin between Shaunak Durop and Stacey Ashlyn.
26 actual votes.
Yep.
Okay.
And so Shaunak's in second place, and he's held that pretty consistently since late on Tuesday night when he pulled ahead to second place. And then 79 votes between separating Stacey and Kathy Jordan. That's very, very close. There's the potential for a recount if these numbers don't change significantly, but with the number of uncounted ballots, there's still sort of a lot that could happen.
Yeah. A lot of people are asking when exactly the registrar will declare the race as certified. So what's the process there? When does the recount kick in, and what's the parameter?
The registrar said they wouldn't declare the necessity for any recount until around the third week of November because they have to finish counting all the ballots and certify the results, so it could be a while.
Yeah. So in Santa Clara County, as everyone knows, they allow the ballots to be mailed and received even until today.
Yes, today's the last day.
There's the provisional ballots that people filled out, and there's ones that were dropped off on the day of. So still a lot pending. Yeah. Okay, so there was a winner, though.
Yes, we forget. Ken Dauber was reelected to his second term, and this will be his last term under also the term limits measure that voters passed in this election. So he's got another 4 years.
Yeah. What did he attribute his success to?
You know, it's like he was the only incumbent, so basically his record. And I think, you know, the direction that he believes he's pushed the school board in terms of transparency, being, you know, more effective in terms of communication and better leadership, stronger leadership. He's always emphasized student mental health, and there have been significant changes at the schools in that arena in the last 4 years. So I think really just pointing to his record and the changes that have been made.
Yeah. Yeah, there were competing narratives during the campaign. Certainly the district has improved. There have been problems, but we're on a good trajectory. And one candidate, Kathy Jordan in particular, was very critical of the district, saying it's financial mismanagement, things are a mess, we really need someone to come in and take a strong hand. So did that seem to not resonate as well? I mean, when we're looking at the numbers?
Yeah, I mean, she's not far behind, but she's been in third among the three challengers pretty consistently. So I think it did resonate with some people. I talked to a few of her supporters on Tuesday night who felt really strongly that change is needed, and she's the person who's going to do that for them, given they describe, you know, her being a very persistent person who's willing to execute was the word they used. They like her professional tennis background and sort of draw analogies between that sort of work ethic and what she would be like as a school board member. So then I think there's the flip side of that, of people who felt strongly that the critical campaign is not where the district is, and it's not where the district should be in the next 4 years. We saw the ad that ran in the Weekly last week, criticizing Kathy's interactions with students at the camp in Ely. So it's sort of, and someone else described it to me on election night as Kathy's support being either very strong, and then on the conversely, the opposition very, very strong with her.
Yeah. You know, we see the national polls going into midterm elections or many elections. I kind of wish we had the polls here as well, because there's always last minute kind of jockeying. Certainly the ad that was against Kathy Jordan last week, we don't know if it had any effect or not. Sometimes independent expenditures come in at the last minute.
Yeah.
So what the influences of all these things, hard to tell. What are the three challengers then, the three candidates vying for the second place? What are they doing? What's their attitude right now as they're waiting?
They're just waiting. Everyone's a little frustrated with the pace of the counting of the ballots and feeling like there should be a better system for figuring that out in the days after the election. But I think they're also optimistic. It was an interesting campaign. Shanak, in particular, as a sort of younger, new candidate versus the more established. Stacey Ashland has been a PTA volunteer and done all those roles that are pretty typical for a school board candidate. He seemed really energized by the campaign. He immediately said if he loses, he'll run again in 2020. Stacey and Kathy were less sure about that.
Yeah,
so.
I'm sure they're exhausted.
Yes.
Well, let's turn our attention to the Palo Alto City Council. There was a clear winner in that one as well.
Yeah, I wish my life was as exciting as ELENA's this week. But there were 3 clear winners, and one of them was an overwhelming, emphatic win. Allison Cormack, the newcomer, pretty much destroyed the competition, won almost every precinct, and took about 28% of all the votes cast. So she had the most votes. She was followed by Tom Du Bois and Eric Felseth, who were pretty much neck and neck throughout the whole election night. When the results were first announced, Du Bois was up by 1 vote, and I think
those two really tracked.
They really tracked, and if you look at the precinct map, people who supported one typically supported the other, so they comfortably landed in the 2 and 3 slots, which meant that the odd man out this year is Corey Wolbach, the incumbent, who was the council's most staunch pro-housing advocate, and who was generally associated with the more pro-growth wing. So it looks like he will not be getting a second term.
What did Allison say she attributed her success to? Was it issue-oriented or a strong campaign?
I think she's told me that she's not surprised by her result, like when I spoke to her, just because she has been heavily involved with the library bond. A lot of people knew her, and so her signs were all over the place throughout the city. So she said she was very lifted in the final weeks of the campaign in talking to people as to how many people said they would support her. So it seems like she was expecting this, and I feel like a lot of people thought she would do well, but people were kind of surprised by just how well she did. I mean, she pulling more than 30% of all votes in certain precincts. And, I was at one election party where I was basically, as soon as the results came out, I asked Tom Du Bois, so does this look like it's in the bag? Because he was pretty up ahead. And he's like, nope, just for one candidate. And so it was pretty clear immediately that she was going to win. But, and for the other 2, for Tom and Eric, it was pretty much, they were pretty businesslike. They kind of expected it, and they weren't competing with each other.
Okay.
How did Allison's fundraising compare to the other candidates?
She did really well. I mean, she and Corey were the top 2 fundraisers. Each had about $60,000, which subjected her to some criticism from those with the more residentialist bent, the slow growth people. They pointed to some independent expenditures and basically the fact that she was the only candidate who did not kind of disavow contributions from developers, even though developers made a minuscule proportion of her total. So yeah, she fundraised very heavily, and pretty much everybody got a lot of funds this year around except Pat Boone, and he finished in 5th place, which is pretty typical for candidates who run kind of these, they call it grassroots campaigns, but in a sense they're all grassroots, but certain candidates like to make a big deal out of the fact that they're not accepting donations, they're not running with money. They talk about their votes per dollar spent, and they usually don't get elected. So Pat had a very positive, very energetic campaign, but he fell short.
Yeah. So one thing that I found interesting was that finances were kind of an issue in the campaign. People were talking about should there be limits or not. Wolbach ended up in 4th, Cormack in 1st, but they were the 2 top fundraisers with 60,000,
yes,
70,000?
in the $60,000 range, a little above.
Yeah. So it doesn't show. It shows that dollars don't equal votes necessarily.
Not directly. I think there's some minimum threshold, kind of, just to get your name out there. But once you get past that, having way more than that or way less than that doesn't seem to be as big a deal. There seems to be a lower marginal utility once you get past a certain sum. And if you look at what happened in the Mid-Peninsula race, I mean, if money translated directly to votes, Greg Scharf would have trounced her. Instead, she won with more than 2/3 of the vote. Karen Holman did.
Yeah.
And in school boards, Kathy Jordan far outraised everyone with more than 50,000, which seemed like a huge amount for the school board race.
Yeah.
Unusual.
Yeah.
And she's in 4th.
It sounds like it's enough for people to see your flyer 2 times to know your name. Once they see it 15 times, I don't think it makes that much of a difference.
Interesting.
But that's just a hypothesis.
Yeah, need those surveys again.
Right.
So the precincts where Wolbach didn't do as well, we really saw the residentialist influence in this race, didn't we?
We did, and I think one result of this election, I think, is the fact that it seems like the extremism might not play as well this election as it has in the past. I think Corey was perceived as extreme on development. He would, I'm sure, argue with that, especially when it comes to office. But in those areas that have been most active in kind of opposing development and supporting like the Mabel referendum and things like that, that's where he did exceptionally poorly. Like we're talking Barron Park and even Crescent Park, where you have large lots and where people tend to be a little more cautious about growth. Like, there's a very strong neighborhood association.
Very protective of their R1.
Very protective of having parking, and there's been terrible traffic problems and terrible parking problems. So they have some reasons to be cautious about having a lot of growth. In those precincts, Corey did particularly poorly. At sometimes finishing like 100 votes, like behind the rest. So even though he competed very well, like in many precincts throughout the city, and was kind of on par, in some cases edging out either Du Bois or Filseth, like in Ventura, for example, because of the overwhelming kind of support for the other candidates in Crescent Park, Barron Park, those kinds of places, he really didn't have a chance to kind of gain them.
I see. When he fell behind, it was by a large margin.
It was by quite a margin.
Got
really
it.
set him back.
Yeah. Real quickly, let's talk about measures E and F, which went pretty much as people expected.
Well,
or not so expected.
I mean, I think the results were expected. I didn't know they would be this lopsided, especially on Measure E. And even though Measure E, which would increase hotel tax from 14% to 15.5%, there was, I think most people thought it would pass, but nobody was too enthusiastic about it. I feel like the overwhelming sentiment by council members and candidates and newspapers was, we kind of like it. Let's kind of support it. So, and in the past, hotel taxes had that kind of margin, but I thought that because this would make Palo Alto's hotel tax rate among the highest in the state, which is kind of a dubious honor, it might be slightly less support, but I guess it didn't really matter to people.
Yeah.
And the language was very vaguely worded, and it rankled some people, but I guess most voters didn't care that much. Like, other people are paying, we might benefit, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And the hotel tax, I feel like when you look at how much, not the hotel tax, the healthcare measure, Measure F, that got trounced. Like 77%, I think, of the voters voted against it. This was a union-backed measure that would have capped healthcare cost at 115% of direct cost of providing the service. If you look at how many millions of dollars, like the hospitals and the hospital association poured into opposing it, and just seeing the signs all over the city.
We haven't seen that kind of spending.
Yeah, it's like it was kind of. You knew it's going to be an uphill climb in any event for like a union-backed measure like that, but I think the margin was kind of a little eye-opening because the idea of having affordable health care is still a powerful message, especially in a democratic district like we have. So the idea that so many people would vote against something with that kind of title, like Palo Alto, affordable, accountability, whatever, is kind of, people saw through it.
Yeah. Before we leave Palo Alto races, I have to just mention that this was the first year when both the Daily Post and the weekly endorsements were aligned on the council and the school board and Measure F. I can't remember for Measure E. Pretty sure.
I think the Post was against Measure E and Measure F. So.
Right. Yeah.
So we weren't aligned on Measure E, but I think we were on everything else.
Yeah. Which kind of just raises the question again. Hard to answer, what's the influence of all these different factors, whether it's money or connections, endorsements, or newspaper endorsements. But definitely the results for the candidates that we endorsed in council, sizable, F, totally trounced. Yeah.
And I think it's too easy to read into like why certain candidates won and why certain candidates lost, and different people could have different theories. I think at the end of the day, Allison just ended up running a really good campaign. She was a strong candidate. I don't know if Corey had other policies where he would have been able to beat her anyway. I mean, he barely got into the council like after like a recount against Lydia Koo in 14, and she was just such a strong candidate that she basically destroyed everybody in the field. So. I wouldn't read too much about the city's political dynamics and what this means for residentialists and what this means for YIMBYs. It's like, we could all have our theories, but I think at the end of the day, there was just a very strong candidate that did a lot better than all the incumbents.
Yeah, and we'll see when the new council forms, the slimmed down council, in January what this all means really for the city.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to talk about Ravenswood. So two of the incumbents are out, Charlie May Knight and Marcelina Lopez. So who's in?
So Ana Maria Pulido, who's the current president of the school board, she's been on the board since 2010. They have no term limits in Ravenswood. And then two newcomers, Stephanie Fitch and Laura Nunez. So I think I sort of wrote about the results before the results came out of this being a referendum, or sort of a litmus test, or where the district is at, because there's very strong, or polarized, I would say, sides of the people who supported the incumbents and the current state of the district and where it was going, and the current superintendent, and then the criticism of all of that, and wanting, saying new leadership is needed to protect the district moving forward. So I think Pulido has strong. She's been around, name recognition. She's been around for a while, and people trust that she's going to continue the work that she's done, and she has the record to point to. And then these two newcomers are interesting. One of them is a teacher at a charter school, East Palo Alto Academy. The other one works for Summit Public Schools, so two charter school affiliated people, which is interesting. But I think sort of it's a reflection. So to have two newcomers and only one candidate or incumbent candidate indicates sort of the strong support for wanting a different direction in some ways.
Yeah, they're looking for a change, and all three are fairly young.
Yes.
As well, young and energized. Marcelino Lopez, hadn't he been in on the school board for a really long time?
Yes, I forget the year he was first elected, but he initially ran on a reform slate, very critical of Charlie May Knight when she was superintendent years and years ago. So he's been around for a while.
Yeah, more than a decade. I'm thinking
Yes.
maybe 15 years to 20 years.
Yeah, maybe
possibly.
it was 16 years.
Yeah.
Long time.
So for a 5-member board, that's a real shakeup.
Yes.
And we'll see if they take up the mantle and make some changes, especially for the superintendent.
Yeah.
I think that will be something to watch.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. East Palo Alto City Council.
Yeah.
Seeing Ruben Abrica and Regina Wallace-Jones get the 2 seats. Ruben's the incumbent, current mayor.
Right.
Regina will replace Donna Rutherford. So
Yes.
what's that dynamic all about?
Well, it's really kind of hard to say. I think that one of the main reasons why Donna probably didn't make it this time is because what other people have told me in the community is that she doesn't always present that well on the council. She's kind of quiet. She maybe a little on the shy side, and doesn't seem that well prepared. Although she has done a lot of things for the community, and people backed her for that reason. So she lost. Wallace-Jones basically she's a techie. She's a tech executive. She comes out very strong. She has a very strong personality, and she was backed with a lot of money this time. And that was a real change in terms of East Palo Alto's dynamic for how politics goes.
More than 30,000?
Yeah, she brought in more than $30,000. Some of it from small amount, but some of it from developers, and some of the biggest landowners in the city. But I think there's it's an interesting dynamic because you've got Regina's kind of, although she'll say she's for all of the people, she has in the past kind of supported gentrification. I heard her once make a statement when Reverend Jesse Jackson was in town that basically that was saying, why shouldn't my house be of equal value to the Palo Alto homes? I want to basically see my property increase in value, and Jackson was talking about the importance of preventing gentrification in East Palo Alto.
Yeah,
so
definitely the hot button issue.
Yeah, it is.
East Palo Alto. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it both?
Yeah, it's kind of Ruben, on the other hand, he was one of the initial people who helped with the incorporation of the city. He has a long track record. He really got the Latino vote, is my understanding. It's kind of like it's an interesting thing that seems to be taking place between the old guard and the new. And whether or not that really, it's kind of hard to say. It's not like a repudiation took place of Rutherford because, like she's on one side of the fence and Regina Wallace-Jones is on the other.
Right, not clear.
It really isn't clear. So I don't know where things will really go in the future, but certainly if the community votes in another sort of pro-growth, pro-development candidate, then you'll see a real shift.
Yeah.
And the mood I've heard is that people now feel that they're sort of everything's up for grabs, including the potential that the rent stabilization ordinance might disappear over time, something like that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Measure HH, so-called tech tax, but really a tax on commercial properties over a certain size.
Yeah.
That also passed.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing when you look at the candidates who won, and then you look at the fact that HH that had to basically pass by 2/3 vote won so handily. Then you have to say that that is a tax that basically would create more funding for affordable housing, for job training, for higher wage jobs, that type of thing. It kind of leans towards the old council way of thinking, and preservation of people who basically don't have a lot in the community, that don't have money. It's like not the moneyed, but those who are renters and people who are immigrants, and so on and so forth. So it shows a very strong support for them through this particular measure. And so, I think it'll be interesting to see how things go.
Yeah, I think some in the community that you talked to were concerned that maybe HH wouldn't pass, that the gentrification, the pressures from corporations nearby might be already changing the community into something that is not recognizable to those who've been there for a long time. But
Yeah.
HH did pass, and that was an indication to some that the values continue to be what they have been.
Yes, and I think also the developers, there were quite a number of letters that came out to the council when this was first going to go on the ballot, and they were very upset, and they said, they tried to argue that there would be no development in East Palo Alto if this passed, and that there wouldn't be any, basically wouldn't be enough money to go around. The city needs a lot of money to go into infrastructure for new development, roads, sewers, water, and particularly in the Ravenswood business district area, and where they hope to have a lot of development of commercial properties. And so, but in talking to one of the developers, or one of the investors, I should say, he said the mood, even before the actual vote took place, he said, it appears it's going to pass, and we'll just work, we're all in this for the long haul, nobody's going anywhere, so we'll try to work with the council and make things work.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Appreciate all your updates on the election. We will wait to see what happens in the school board race. So that's it for election news for now. To keep up on all the happenings in Palo Alto, including the latest on the evictions at the President Hotel and the sea lion that tried to cross East Bayshore Road, go to paloaltoonline.com. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you like our webcast, please help us out by hitting subscribe or like below. And we'll see you next week.